The beginning. The land of Canaan. The history of Israel begins long before the modern state existed. Its roots go back thousands of years to a time when the first civilizations of the ancient world were forming in the Middle East. About 4,000 years ago, a man named Abraham lived in ancient Mesopotamia. According to ancient traditions and religious texts, the story of the Jewish people begins with him. Abraham lived in the city of Ur, one of the great centers of the ancient world. Today, this area lies in what is now Iraq. At some point in his life, Abraham left his homeland and began a long journey westward to a land known as Canaan. This region lay between the great civilizations of the ancient world, Egypt to the south and the kingdoms of Mesopotamia to the east. Canaan was a crossroads of trade, culture, and ideas. According to tradition, it was here that the identity of the people who would later be called Israel began to form. Abraham had a son named Isaac, and Isaac had a son named Jacob. Jacob became one of the central figures in the early story of the people. According to biblical tradition, after a mysterious night struggle with an angel, Jacob received a new name, Israel, which can be translated as one who struggles with God, or God prevails. From that moment on, the name Israel became the name of the entire people. Jacob had 12 sons. Each of them became the ancestor of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. These tribes formed the foundation of the future nation. However, events soon forced them to leave this land, Egypt and slavery. At some point, a severe famine struck the land of Canaan. Because of the shortage of food, the family of Jacob and his descendants moved to Egypt. At first, they were received fairly peacefully. According to tradition, one of Jacob's sons, Joseph, rose to an important position in the Egyptian court, which made it easier for the entire family to settle there. But decades passed. The descendants of Israel grew into a large and numerous people. New Egyptian rulers began to see them as a potential threat. Gradually, the situation of the Hebrews changed. They became slaves in Egypt. According to ancient texts, they were forced to work on construction projects and perform heavy labor. This period of slavery lasted for several generations, and it was during this time that a man appeared who would change the fate of the people forever. His name was Moses. According to tradition, Moses was born into a Hebrew family, but was raised in the household of Pharaoh. Later, he became the leader of his people. Moses demanded that Pharaoh allow the Israelites to leave Egypt. Pharaoh refused. According to the biblical narrative, Egypt was then struck by a series of dramatic events known as the 10 plagues of Egypt. After these events, Pharaoh finally allowed the Israelites to leave. Thus began the Exodus from Egypt, one of the most important events in Jewish history. However, the path to freedom was long. After leaving Egypt, the people wandered through the desert for about 40 years. During this journey, a defining moment took place. On Mount Sinai, Moses received the 10 Commandments. These commandments became the foundation of Jewish religion, morality, and social life. The return to Canaan and the age of the judges. After decades of wandering in the desert, the Israelite tribes gradually returned to the land of Canaan. But their return did not immediately create a unified state. The region was already inhabited by many different peoples and city-states. Because of this, the process of settling and securing control of the land took many years. During this time, the Israelites did not yet have a single king. They lived as a confederation of tribes. Each tribe had its own leaders and territories. However, in times of crisis or war, special leaders emerged, known as judges. The judges served as military commanders, political leaders, and spiritual guides. They united the tribes to defend against enemies. Among the most famous judges were Gideon, Samson, Deborah. This period became known as the Age of the Judges. It lasted for several centuries. But over time, threats from neighboring peoples grew stronger. One of the most serious challenges came from the Philistines, a powerful people living along the Mediterranean coast. Constant warfare eventually forced the Israelite tribes to consider creating a stronger and more centralized system of leadership. And so a new chapter in their history was about to begin. The Age of Kings, which would lead to the creation of the United Kingdom of Israel, the rise of the kingdom, and the reign of Saul. By the end of the Age of the Judges, the Israelite tribes were facing increasing pressure from neighboring peoples. One of the most dangerous enemies were the Philistines, who lived along the Mediterranean coast. The Philistines possessed more advanced weapons and stronger military organization. They frequently raided the territories of the Israelite tribes. The tribal system of leadership was no longer strong enough to protect the people. Because of this, the idea of establishing a unified kingdom began to grow among the Israelites. According to ancient texts, the people asked the prophet Samuel to appoint a king to rule over them. Samuel initially resisted the idea, believing that the people should be ruled only by God. But eventually he agreed. Thus, the first king of Israel became Saul. Saul came from the tribe of Benjamin and was known for his impressive height and courage. He succeeded in uniting many of the tribes and creating the first organized Israelite army. During the early years of his reign, Israel was able to successfully defend itself against neighboring enemies. However, over time the relationship between Saul and the prophet Samuel deteriorated. Samuel began to believe that Saul had stopped following the will of God. It was during this period that another figure appeared, a young shepherd named David, who would soon change the destiny of Israel. David and the Golden Age of Israel. The story of David begins in humble circumstances. He was the youngest son in his family and spent much of his time tending sheep. Yet the prophet Samuel secretly anointed him as the future king. David first gained fame through one of the most well-known stories in ancient history, his battle with the Philistine warrior Goliath. Goliath was considered an unbeatable giant warrior, but David defeated him with nothing more than a sling and a stone. This story later became a powerful symbol of how the weak can overcome the strong. After this event, David became famous as a warrior and gradually gained popularity among the people. However, his rising fame caused jealousy in King Saul. The relationship between Saul and David grew increasingly tense, and David was eventually forced to flee. After Saul's death, a struggle for power began. In the end, David became king, first over part of Israel, and eventually over the entire nation. Around 1000 BCE, David captured the city of Jerusalem. This city was strategically located between the territories of different tribes. David made Jerusalem the capital of the kingdom. This decision would shape Jewish history for thousands of years. Under David's rule, the kingdom expanded and became a regional power. But David was remembered not only as a warrior and king. Many of the Psalms, Important religious poems and prayers are traditionally attributed to him. After David's death, the throne passed to his son, King Solomon. Solomon's reign is often described as the period of greatest prosperity and stability in ancient Israel. Solomon was famous for his wisdom. One of the most well-known stories about him is the Judgment of Solomon, which demonstrated his extraordinary insight and sense of justice. But Solomon's most important achievement was the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem. The temple became the central religious site of the Jewish people. It symbolized unity, faith, and the spiritual heart of the nation. Jerusalem was now firmly established as the religious and political center of Israel. However, after Solomon's death, the kingdom entered a period of crisis. The division of the kingdom and the approach of disaster. After Solomon's death around 930 BCE, the United Kingdom of Israel split apart. The reasons for this division included internal conflicts, heavy taxation, and dissatisfaction among the northern tribes. The once united kingdom divided into two separate states, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. The northern kingdom was larger and wealthier. Its capital eventually became the city of Samaria. The southern kingdom of Judah was smaller but retained control of Jerusalem and the temple. This division weakened both kingdoms. They were no longer strong enough to resist the growing power of the great empires of the ancient Near East. The northern kingdom of Israel was the first to fall. In 722 BCE, it was conquered by the powerful Assyrian Empire. Many of its inhabitants were deported to other parts of the empire. From that point on, the 10 northern tribes largely disappeared from historical records. They later became known as the Lost Tribes of Israel. The southern kingdom of Judah survived for more than a century longer. But another powerful empire soon rose in the region, the Babylonian Empire. In 586 BCE, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II captured Jerusalem. The city was destroyed. The most devastating event was the destruction of the first temple, the temple built by Solomon. This was a massive blow to the religious and national life of the Jewish people. Many inhabitants of Judah were taken into Babylonian exile. With this event, the era of the ancient kingdom of Israel came to an end. Yet the story of the Jewish people did not end there. In fact, a new and dramatic chapter was just beginning. The return from Babylon and the Second Temple. After the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BCE, a large part of the population of Judah was taken into Babylonian exile. For the Jewish people, this was a devastating experience. They had lost their capital, their temple, and their kingdom. Yet even in exile, the Jewish people did not disappear. In fact, this period became a time of deep religious transformation. Without a temple and sacrificial rituals, the center of spiritual life gradually shifted toward the law, sacred texts, and community life. Jewish scholars and religious leaders began to preserve traditions and strengthen religious practices that could survive even without a state or temple. Then, several decades later, history took an unexpected turn. In 539 BCE, the Babylonian Empire was conquered by the Persian Empire. Its ruler was Cyrus the Great. Cyrus followed an unusually tolerant policy toward conquered peoples. Instead of destroying their cultures, he allowed them to maintain the traditions and religions. He issued a decree allowing the Jewish exiles to return to their homeland. This decision became one of the most important turning points in Jewish history. Many exiles returned to Jerusalem. The city was largely in ruins, but gradually reconstruction began. The most important project was the rebuilding of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. The temple was completed around 516 BCE. Although the new temple was less magnificent than Solomon's temple, it once again became the spiritual center of Jewish life. During this time, important religious leaders, such as Ezra and Nehemiah, helped strengthen Jewish religious law and identity. However, peace in the region would not last forever. A new empire was about to reshape the ancient world, Alexander the Great, and the Greek era. In the 4th century BCE, one of the most remarkable figures in ancient history appeared, Alexander the Great. In just a few years, he built an enormous empire stretching from Greece to India. In 332 BCE, his armies entered the region of Judea. The land became part of the Greek world. After Alexander's death, his vast empire quickly broke apart. His generals divided the territories into several kingdoms. Judea found itself caught between two powerful Hellenistic states, the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt and the Seleucid Empire of Syria. This period became known as the Age of Hellenization. Greek language, culture, philosophy, and customs spread throughout the region. Many inhabitants adopted elements of Greek culture. However, for many Jews, this cultural influence created serious tension. The situation became particularly difficult under the rule of the Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He attempted to force Greek customs upon the Jewish population and banned certain Jewish religious practices. The temple in Jerusalem was desecrated. For many Jews, this was unacceptable. In 167 BCE, a rebellion broke out. This uprising became known as the Maccabean Revolt. It was led by a Jewish priest named Mattathias, and later by his son Judah Maccabee. Despite being poorly equipped compared to their enemies, the rebels managed to win several important victories. In 164 BCE, Jerusalem was liberated. The temple was purified and rededicated. This event is remembered through the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah, which is still celebrated today. After their victory, the Maccabees established a period of Jewish independence under the Hasmonean dynasty. But once again, independence would prove to be temporary. A new superpower was rising in the West, the arrival of Rome and the destruction of the Second Temple. By the 1st century BCE, the dominant power in the Mediterranean world was the Roman Republic, soon to become the Roman Empire. In 63 BCE, the Roman general Pompey captured Jerusalem. Judea became a client state under Roman influence. Later, Rome installed Herod the Great as the king of Judea. Herod ruled with Roman support and became known for his massive building projects. One of his most ambitious projects was the expansion and reconstruction of the Jerusalem temple. Under Herod, the temple complex became one of the most impressive architectural sites in the ancient world. However, Herod's rule was also marked by political intrigue and brutality. After his death, Roman control over the region increased. Tensions between the Jewish population and Roman authorities began to grow. Several factors fueled this unrest: heavy taxation, political oppression, and the desire for independence. In 66 CE, the situation erupted into open conflict. This became known as the Great Jewish Revolt. At first, Jewish rebels achieved several successes and managed to take control of Jerusalem. But Rome responded with overwhelming military force. Roman legions marched into the region to crush the rebellion. After several years of warfare, Jerusalem was surrounded and placed under siege. In 70 CE, the city finally fell. Jerusalem was destroyed. The most devastating loss was the destruction of the Second Temple. The temple that had stood for nearly 6 centuries was burned. Only a small part of its outer retaining wall survived. Today, that remnant is known as the Western Wall, one of the most sacred sites in Judaism. This event became a turning point in Jewish history. Yet another rebellion would follow, and it would change the destiny of the Jewish people forever. The Bar Kokhba revolt and the beginning of the Great Diaspora. The destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE was a devastating blow, but Jewish resistance did not end there. Despite the defeat, many Jews continued to live in Judea. They still hoped that one day they would regain their independence. However, the Roman Empire gradually strengthened its control over the region. In the early 2nd century CE, Emperor Hadrian came to power. Hadrian decided to transform the ruined city of Jerusalem into a typical Roman colony. A new Roman city called Aelia Capitolina was planned on the site of the ancient city. Even more controversial was the decision to build a pagan temple on the location where the Jewish temple had once stood. For many Jews, this was seen as a profound insult and a direct threat to their faith. In 132 CE, a new uprising broke out against Roman rule. This rebellion was led by a man named Simon Bar Kokhba. Some Jewish religious leaders believed that Bar Kokhba might be the long-awaited liberator of the Jewish people. At the beginning, the revolt was surprisingly successful. Jewish forces managed to regain control of large parts of Judea. For a short time, they even established what appeared to be an independent Jewish state. Coins were minted, and attempts were made to restore Jewish political authority. But the Roman Empire responded with overwhelming force. Some of its most experienced legions were sent to crush the rebellion. The war lasted several years and became one of the most brutal conflicts in the region's history. By 135 CE, the revolt was completely suppressed. The consequences were catastrophic. Many towns and villages were destroyed. Large parts of the population were killed. Jews were banned from living in Jerusalem. The city was permanently transformed into the Roman colony, Aelia Capitolina. Even the name of the region was changed. In an attempt to erase the memory of ancient Israel, the Romans began referring to the area as Palestina. From this point forward, a new era began. The era of the Jewish diaspora. Jewish communities gradually spread across the world. Life in exile nearly 2,000 years. Without a state for nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people lived without their own state. Jewish communities appeared across many parts of the world. They settled in Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and eventually the Americas. Despite the loss of their homeland, Jewish culture and religion continued to develop. During this period, some of the most important Jewish religious texts were compiled. One of the most influential was the Talmud, a vast collection of religious law, commentary, and scholarly discussion. The Talmud became a central foundation of Jewish religious and legal tradition. Over time, different Jewish cultural traditions developed in different regions. In Spain and North Africa, Jewish communities became known as Sephardim. In Central and Eastern Europe, Jewish communities developed into what became known as Ashkenazi culture. There were periods when Jewish communities experienced relative stability and prosperity. One such period occurred in Muslim Spain during the early Middle Ages. During this time, Jewish scholars made important contributions to philosophy, medicine, science, and literature. However, these periods of stability were often followed by persecution. In medieval Europe, Jews were frequently blamed for social and economic problems. During the Black Death in the 14th century, for example, Jewish communities were falsely accused of spreading the plague. This led to violent attacks and massacres. In many countries, Jews were forbidden from owning land or entering certain professions. At various times, they were expelled from entire kingdoms. One of the most famous expulsions occurred in 1492, when Jews were forced to leave Spain. Tens of thousands of people were driven from their homes. Many found refuge in the Ottoman Empire, where they were allowed to rebuild their communities. Despite living scattered across continents, Jewish communities maintained a strong cultural and spiritual connection to their ancient homeland. Jerusalem remained a powerful symbol. For centuries, Jewish prayers repeated a simple hope that one day the people would return, the birth of Zionism and the return to Palestine. In the 19th century, Europe was undergoing enormous social and political changes. In many countries, Jews began to receive civil rights and legal equality. But at the same time, anti-Semitism was growing stronger in many parts of Europe. In the Russian Empire, waves of violent pogroms targeted Jewish communities. In France, a major political scandal erupted, the Dreyfus Affair. A Jewish army officer, Alfred Dreyfus, was falsely accused of spying and sentenced to prison. The case shocked many observers and revealed that anti-Semitism could exist even in modern democratic societies. It was during this period that an Austrian journalist named Theodor Herzl reached an important conclusion. He believed that the Jewish people could only achieve safety and stability by creating their own state. This idea became known as Zionism. The name comes from Zion, one of the ancient names for Jerusalem. In 1897, the first Zionist Congress was held in the Swiss city of Basel. At this meeting, Zionist leaders declared their goal: to establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Following the Congress, new waves of Jewish immigrants began moving to the region. They established agricultural communities, built towns, and developed infrastructure. However, the land was already inhabited by Arab communities. As Jewish immigration increased, tensions between the two populations began to grow. These tensions would eventually become one of the central conflicts of the modern Middle East. The Holocaust, the greatest tragedy of the Jewish people. In the first half of the 20th century, Europe was heading toward one of the darkest catastrophes in human history. After World War I, Germany faced severe economic collapse, political instability, and social unrest. Amid these conditions, radical political movements began to gain power. In 1933, Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist Party came to power in Germany. The ideology of Nazism was built upon extreme racial theories. Within this ideology, Jews were portrayed as enemies of the German nation. At first, persecution took the form of discrimination. Jews were removed from government positions, excluded from universities, and stripped of many professional rights. Gradually, the situation worsened. In 1935, the Nazi government introduced the Nuremberg Laws, which stripped Jews of their citizenship and basic civil rights. In 1938, violence erupted across Germany and Austria during an event known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. Jewish synagogues were burned. Jewish businesses were destroyed. Thousands of Jews were arrested. But the most horrific stage began during World War II. As Nazi Germany occupied large parts of Europe, its leaders began implementing what they called the final solution. Jewish populations were forced into ghettos, where overcrowding, hunger, and disease were common. Later, millions of Jews were deported to extermination camps. Some of the most notorious camps included Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec. In these camps, people were murdered in gas chambers or died from starvation, forced labor, and disease. By the end of the war, approximately 6 million Jews had been killed. This represented nearly one-third of the entire Jewish population of the world at that time. The Holocaust became one of the most horrifying tragedies in human history. When the war ended, the world was shocked by the scale of the destruction. The tragedy strengthened international support for the creation of a Jewish homeland, the creation of the State of Israel. After World War II, tensions in Palestine intensified. The territory was still under British administration, but conflicts between Jewish and Arab communities were becoming increasingly violent. Britain struggled to maintain order in the region. Eventually, the issue was brought before the United Nations. In 1947, the UN proposed a plan to divide Palestine into two separate states, a Jewish state and an Arab state. Jerusalem was to become an international city. Jewish leaders accepted the plan. Arab leaders rejected it. Despite the disagreement, events moved forward rapidly. On May 14, 1948, in the city of Tel Aviv, Jewish leader David Ben-Gurion officially declared the creation of the State of Israel. For many Jews around the world, this moment represented the fulfillment of a dream that had existed for nearly 2,000 years. But the Declaration of Independence immediately triggered war. The following day, armies from several Arab countries, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, invaded the territory. This conflict became known as the First Arab-Israeli War. Despite being a newly formed state with limited resources, Israel managed to survive the war. After the conflict, the borders of the new state were reshaped, and the regional conflict continued. In the decades that followed, several major wars took place. 1956. The Suez Crisis. 1967. The Six-Day War, in which Israel defeated several neighboring armies in less than a week. 1973. The Yom Kippur War, when Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack. Despite constant security challenges, Israel continued to develop and grow. Over time, it became one of the world's leading centers of technology and innovation. Today, Israel is often referred to as the startup nation, a people that survived time. The history of Israel is a story of extraordinary resilience. Over the course of 4,000 years, the Jewish people endured events that could have destroyed many civilizations. The fall of ancient kingdoms, the destruction of Jerusalem, the loss of their temple, nearly 2,000 years without a homeland, persecution, expulsions, and violence across many countries, and finally, the tragedy of the Holocaust. Yet despite everything, the Jewish people did not disappear. They preserved their culture, They preserved their religion, and they preserved the memory of the land of their ancestors. For centuries, this memory was passed down through prayers and traditions. Generation after generation repeated the same words of hope. Next year in Jerusalem. And after nearly 2,000 years, that hope became reality. Today, Israel is a modern nation where ancient history meets the technologies of the future. But the story of the Middle East is still unfolding. New chapters are being written even now. Because the story of Israel is not only the story of a country, it is the story of survival, memory, and return.